You've just made the considerations necessary for you to become open to new inspirations and ideas when it comes to creating the content within your Dungeons & Dragons world. And now, it's time for you to select the in-game creators of your content. Together, we will select the divine entities that will define the existential themes of your adventures and campaigns and help you become a much more spiritually connected Novice DM. You've picked up your books from your local comic shop. You've got lots of dice to roll. But you're stressed by all the pages and responsibility, and you fear you'll lose control. So you wanna be a DM, but you don't know where to start. Me neither. Welcome, brothers and sisters, to the official part 1 of our Dungeon Master Workshop. Today, we're going to be focusing on helping each other find specific deities that work for us, that we can put into the religious pantheon that exists within our world. Now, what exactly is a pantheon? Well, the very loose term that I have in my notes, and it's a very, very loose term, is essentially the collection of deities that exist within your world, and the religious systems that follow each of those deities. Now, to create this pantheon, we're going to be looking at pages 10 to 13 within the Dungeon Master's Guide, as well as pages 293 to 299 within the Player's Handbook. Now, before really looking into this, I want to address, I know that the first question that is going through your head right now is, why is it important for me to have to sit down and pick all the deities that are going to exist within my made-up pantheon? Why does that matter? Well, aside from the reasons I listed off in the intro as to why this is important, there is a much bigger one, and that is peace of mind for you and for your players. See, picking a deity to have is not necessarily something that is majorly important for every class. It is, however, important for clerics and for paladins. When a player decides they want to be a cleric or a paladin, they have to decide what divine entity or energy source they are pulling their powers from. And it's important for them to know exactly why they're following a specific deity or a specific entity. Of course, the first impulse we'll have is like, well, we know that there's a whole bunch of deities listed in the Player's Handbook. Maybe we should just give that to them and say, hey, look through this and pick a deity that you like and then get back to me and then we'll be able to work in the game. That sounds good, right? After everything I've said in the first 2 videos about saying, hey, be there for your players. Make sure your players don't, have limited choices. Make sure that everything you have gives them unlimited opportunities. Well, this is a moment that really emphasizes why it's important that there is a dungeon master in this game, and it's not just players, telling off rules and telling different stories. In the Player's Handbook, there is a listing of 195 gods, goddesses, and divine entities. And many of them come from different worlds that are within the lore and history of Dungeons & Dragons, and a lot of them are also from, non-fictional religious pantheons that exist within the real world. And if you just hand your player the book and say, pick a deity you like, you're creating potentially 195 different religious systems for your world. You're also creating potentially 195 opportunities for your players to lose their freaking minds. Another big reason why it's important to create a pantheon for your world is it kind of articulates to your players that you've dedicated a lot of your personal time and effort into really understanding how your world works and understanding the organizations and factions that exist within your world. It's really important for them to understand that you know what you're doing, and creating a pantheon is a really simple way of doing that. Really what this is you're looking at deities that you like and that you hope other players like, and that's really it. Now, what do you need to consider when selecting the deities for your world? Good question. The Dungeon Master's Guide recommends that you pick deities that give a openness when it comes to the domains that they are associated with. Now, what I mean by domains is cleric domains. When players pick a cleric as their class, at their very first level, they pick a domain that they want to pursue that they will channel their divine energy from. In the Player's Handbook, there are 7 domains listed for clerics. There is knowledge, nature, tempest, light, life, war, and trickery. And in the Dungeon Master's Guide, there's another one listed which is the death domain. What you're going to be doing is basically picking deities that have enough variety individually around them when it comes to what domains are represented within your world. Quick side note here. When you're picking these deities based on their domains, what you're doing is you're helping yourself, round out diversity within suggested domains. You're not picking the deities that certain clerics that follow a domain will only have access to. Whatever deity a player wants to follow or be devout towards, that is what they're going to follow, and they get to pick whatever domain they want. Let's say, for instance, a player wants to pick a deity that, has the suggested domains of war or life, but they want to pursue the knowledge domain. And that's fine. That's fine. They don't need to pick a deity that follows the knowledge domain when it comes to their suggested domains. It's all based on however the player wants to play the game and whatever deity they connect with. And that's important to remember, because when you're looking through the list of deities, you start to realize there's a lot of deities that follow the same kind of domains and actually seem to have similar traits and featured taglines like the god of blankety blank, the god of life, the god of love and life and blood, all this stuff. So there's a lot of similarities with this. What makes the deities distinct and what helps players decide what deities they want to pursue is ultimately how you describe them to your players, and more specifically, how you describe those that follow these deities. What you're going to do is focus on 3 considerations for each deity that you wish to select. The first one, what is the general appearance and personality of people that will follow a specific deity? For one of your deities, are their followers a little bit beshaggled, scruffy looking? Are they, deformed creatures of multiple different kinds of races? Or is there a deity out there that, the majority of their followers are beautiful creatures that are singular to one specific race? Having that description is going to help you when it comes to improvising NPCs that, players come up to when they come into an area that is deeply devout with one deity. The second consideration you're going to make is, what are the principal values of those devout followers that commit their lives to this deity? Is there a deity out there that believes in the preservation of mortal life, and that a character is just never going to waver from the concept of making sure that all of natural life is preserved? Is there a deity who believes that life is a risk and every chance is an opportunity to exploit somebody else? And so the followers that follow that deity, do they believe the same kind of thing? Are they exploitative individuals? Are they manipulators? And the third and final thing you're going to consider is, in death, what happens to the followers? What do they believe will happen to them? Second side note, when you're addressing what will happen to them when they die, you're not specifying as to where they go. You're not dealing with outside planes of existence that we haven't gotten there yet. That's a chapter down the road. What you're focusing on instead is the idea that people have. Maybe when they die, they believe that their deity is going to reward them in some way, and that they're going to have everlasting peace in their life, and they can finally be at rest. Or maybe death is a punishment. Maybe they failed their deity in some way by losing their life, and their deity has no cares for them whatsoever after that. So death is a true punishment. For a more clearer example, I'll explain what I've done for one of the deities that I've put in my pantheon, Illmatter. Illmatter has the suggested domain of life, and when I looked at Illmatter, he has the description of being the god of endurance. So in my mind, the people who follow Illmatter are brought to him because they have faced some kind of abuse, whether it be emotional, spiritual, or physical. Maybe it doesn't have to be an actual form of abuse. Maybe they just have some problem with their bodies, maybe a missing leg, a missing eye, maybe their brains don't function properly. They have something to endure. Now, those that are deeply devoted to Illmatter decide that they want to take it upon themselves to relieve the suffering of others. And they want to make other people's pain their own. They want to take on their pain so that other people don't have to experience what they've experienced. And in death, the people that follow Illmatter believe that when they pass, they will finally have a chance to rest. That entire process is what I've considered for each of the 18 deities that I've included in my world's pantheon. Over on this section of my board, I have columns listed for deities that are all present within the player's handbook. These three over here are deities that I made myself, mostly because I didn't find that the player's handbook had enough versatility within certain domains that, I wanted to have, but I had made up ones that were able to fill in the gaps that I thought were missing. That's something you can also do, as suggested in the DM guide. You're able to make your own deities. And as long as you are able to do the same process that I just suggested when it comes to creating what their followers are, maybe even create a little bit of a history for your deities, you are more than capable of making your entire pantheon just custom gods that you made up on the spot. You might also notice that there are brackets next to some of these deities indicating certain different types of religious systems. And that's the final thing that you're going to be focusing on with this workshop. You need to classify what kind of religious system your deities fall under. Now, religious systems are a little bit more complicated, and I don't want to go into the full descriptions of them because I do encourage you to actually read them in the Dungeon Master's Guide because they're much better explained in there. Most of them are pretty easy. There's one called dualism, for example, which is focusing on the idea of two different deities being in conflict with each other. If you saw my board, I had Thor and Loki. Now, that's an obvious one. Thor is considered the good deity in that, and Loki is considered the bad deity in that dualist culture. Those religious organizations are always doing battle with each other. It can be physical battles, or it can be just simply trying to disrupt the very foundation of the religious system as a whole. There's other religious systems too. There's cults, there's monotheisms, which is like one deity. Everybody goes to that person for everything. There's animism, which is the spiritual existence of life in everything from the smallest rock to the giantest tree. But there's one religious system I want to give an example of because it's a little complicated when you're just reading it. It's much better to see an example of it. The religious system I'm talking about is called the Tight Pantheon. This is essentially a pantheon that exists within your pantheon, where everybody acknowledges the existence of all of the gods within your world. There is one pantheon in particular that people that follow specific deities within that pantheon believe is the entire center focus of their religion. Within this tight pantheon, there's usually a leading deity. Now, that deity doesn't need to be the leader for individual players, but it is regarded as the main deity that brings this whole pantheon together. An example of this is the type pantheon I've made for my world, known as Mistral's Star, aka the Tight Arcane Pantheon. Now, this pantheon has the head deity of Mistra, who is known as the Goddess of Magic. Makes sense, you would want the Goddess of Magic to be the leading deity of your magical pantheon. She is considered to be the deity that keeps balance within the arcane weave that travels throughout the multiverse. And those that follow her wish to keep that balance intact. To her right is Azuth, considered her right-hand man, or the god of wizards. Now, those that follow Azuth believe there's a beauty and a sacredness to arcane magic, and make sure that that beauty is always maintained, and make sure that nobody tries to exploit it for nefarious purposes. On the left side, however, is Savras, who is the complete opposite of Azuth. Rather than focusing on preserving the mystery of magic, Savras' followers want to unearth the mysteries, and they want to figure out how magic can be used and applied in different worlds within the multiverse. They want to see what secrets can be obtained, and in places where there is no magic, what kind of barriers they need to break in order to obtain it or be able to use it. Or in places where there's a dominance in magic, what is the dominating force? What is the one school of magic that is the prominent force within that society? And because they're opposed, there is a minor level of dualism that goes between Azuth and Savras. It's not violent necessarily, but it is a dualism based on values and philosophies. And at the very bottom, there is Midnight, the opposite of Mistra. Where Mistra's followers want to make sure that the balance is preserved, Midnight wants to see that arcane power pushed to its limits. That is my Tight Pantheon, and this is one of my favorite things that I was actually able to create early on when I was into world building, because it was something that actually inspired me to create my first city location. And it inspired me for the first ever campaign I was really working on. And you might be wondering, Liam, how did you make this up? How were you able to create such an interesting little, tight pantheon within this pantheon you were creating? The reason I was able to do it was because of collaboration with my players. Specifically, one player, my brother. I did what I recommend you don't do, and that was I gave him the player's handbook and I said, look through all the deities and tell me which ones you like. And he looked through and he picked Azuth. And my brother was playing a paladin. And when I looked at Azuth, I was like, wait, the god of wizards, but you're a paladin. How does that work? How does a character have divine energy brought forth by an arcane creature? I was so confused because my idea and my experiences told me that divine magic is completely different from arcane magic. And now I have a much better and more open understanding. I know that arcane magic is not exclusive to arcane casters, and I know that religious casting is not exclusive to divine characters. I could have just easily said to my brother, "Oh, you can't use a deity that doesn't follow just straightforward divine casting. You can't have one that is inspired by arcane magic. Thank you very much." And if I did that, I would have been shutting myself down from creating one of the most important elements of my world that is still continuing to have an impact on the games that I run today. And yes, it took a lot of research. I didn't just pull these names out of a hat. It wasn't like, okay, Azuth and Mistra and Savras and Midnight, those are the ones I'm going to go to, and they're going to create this. It took me days to make sure that I knew how this pantheon worked and what the followers did within the pantheon, who the core missionaries of this group are, who are the individuals that are like the leaders of this religious arcane council, who are considered the outcasts or the biggest extremists within that pantheon. It took me a lot of time and effort, but that time and effort was worth it. And now because of that, it's led me to be able to create this document here that has a listing of all the deities available to my players within my world with examples of their followers so that they can be inspired to look at this and say, oh my gosh, Tiamat followers, they believe that domination and control of the material plane is inevitable. However, it cannot be acquired unless you reach out to like-minded allies. Well, I want to play as a character that's evil, but I also want to play as a character that doesn't just have a singular focus, who actually reaches out and creates a community. I want to be an emperor of some kind. Or maybe they look at something like Talos and say, you know what, actually, I just want to dedicate my life to destroying somebody and subjecting my inferiors. I am the ultimate king of my world. Stuff like that, experiences like that, are why creating a pantheon is so incredible. And it leads you to being able to create more things. It leads to create settlements dedicated to other deities, or it leads you to creating campaigns that are solely focused on maybe killing a god, or finding lost divine power in an area that was desecrated. I'm excited to share all the deities that I've picked with people, and I want them to just explore every corner of the world just so I can show them what gods were responsible for creating different elements. Now, even after all of this, you're wondering, well, I don't really think it's worth it still. The next video might change your tune, because what we're going to be focusing on next time is actually developing our very first settlement. We're going to be looking into the kind of government that runs a settlement, the kind of people and atmospheric qualities that these settlements have. We're also going to be focusing on writing out scripted material that you can deliver to your players. But that is going to be for next video. Until then, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me, and I hope you were able to construct a really strong, or at least a really fun pantheon that inspires you to think of so many more things that you can offer to your players. Thank you so much, and as always, take care.